Upon returning from a romantic honeymoon with his mistress, my cheating husband marched up to the maternity ward desk and demanded, "Has my wife given birth yet?" The head nurse looked up, her expression a mix of pity and absolute disgust. "Your wife was discharged from the hospital with the baby 15 days ago, sir." My name is Zuri. I am 33 years old, and for the last 5 years I played the quiet, submissive wife to Marcus, a wealthy investment manager who thought his financial power gave him the right to break me. He believed I was just a modest risk analyst, completely dependent on his income. He was wrong. Before I tell you how I systematically dismantled his entire life and took back everything he stole from me, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Please like and subscribe if you have ever plotted a comeback. The polished linoleum floors squeaked under his expensive Italian loafers. He sported a fresh golden tan from the Maldives, his tailored suit at odds with the sterile, quiet atmosphere of the maternity ward. Clinging to his arm was Lexi, his 24-year-old junior assistant, looking incredibly out of place in a designer sundress. Marcus slammed his hand on the reception desk, demanding to know what the nurse meant. The nurse adjusted her glasses and pulled up my file. Zuri paid the $30,000 hospital bill in full in cash. She left a message for you in room 412. That is all I can tell you. Marcus scoffed, dragging Lexi down the hallway. He kicked the door to room 412 open, fully expecting to find me weeping, holding our newborn, begging for an explanation. Instead, the sterile hospital room was immaculate and entirely empty. The bed was perfectly made. Sitting in the center of the crisp white pillow was a single sealed manila envelope with his name written in my steady handwriting. Marcus snatched the envelope, tearing it open with a grunt. Inside was not a desperate plea for him to come back. It was a high-resolution photograph of him and Lexi kissing on the balcony of a luxury overwater villa in the Maldives. Taped to the back of the photograph was a printed receipt from our joint bank account showing a $25,000 withdrawal made on the exact same day my water broke. His face turned pale, then flushed with a terrifying shade of crimson. He shoved Lexi aside and pulled out his phone, dialing my number with shaking, frantic fingers. I was sitting on the velvet nursing chair in the living room of our suburban home, watching my beautiful daughter sleep peacefully against my chest when my phone began to buzz. I let it ring 3 times before I pressed answer. I did not say hello. I just listened to the heavy, ragged breathing on the other end of the line. "What kind of sick game are you playing, Zuri?" Marcus roared into the receiver, his voice echoing loudly enough that I had to pull the phone away from my ear. "You left the hospital without telling me. You paid the bill with what money? And what is this garbage you left on the bed?" "It is a photograph, Marcus," I replied, my voice dangerously calm and completely stripped of the emotion he expected to hear. "I thought you might want a souvenir from your business trip. The lighting in the Maldives is spectacular this time of year." "You listen to me, you ungrateful, emotional mess," he spat, trying to regain his dominant posture. "I am the provider in this house. You do not disrespect me. I had to take that trip for a massive client acquisition. Lexi was there to take notes. You are acting completely crazy. Why did you not just wait for me?" I looked down at my sleeping daughter. "I went into labor at 2 in the morning, Marcus. The contractions were tearing me apart. I called you 42 times. 42. It went straight to voicemail every single time. My mother refused to answer because she was busy picking out dresses for my sister and her anniversary party. I drove myself to the emergency room, gripping the steering wheel while screaming in agony. I pushed our child into this world completely alone while you were drinking champagne on a beach with an intern. You always exaggerate everything." Marcus groaned, completely unfazed by the terrifying reality of what I had endured. "Women give birth every day. You survived, did you not? You are supposed to be a strong black woman, Zuri. Stop whining. I am coming home right now. We are going to sit down, and I am going to teach you a lesson about respect." "I am very lucky," I agreed softly. "Have a safe drive home, Marcus." I hung up the phone and set it on the side table. I did not shed a single tear. The woman who would have cried over Marcus died in that delivery room 15 days ago, surrounded by beeping monitors and the sympathetic eyes of an older nurse who had held my hand and told me it was time to let go of the dead weight. 30 minutes later, an aggressive pounding rattled the front door. Marcus had arrived. He twisted the doorknob, cursing loudly when it refused to budge. He frantically fumbled with his brass keys, shoving them forcefully into the lock, only to realize the deadbolt mechanism had been completely replaced. Through the frosted glass of the front window, I watched him back away from the porch, his confusion morphing into absolute panic. He turned toward the driveway, suddenly realizing that his prized possession, the custom matte black sports car he bought using our savings, was gone. The space where it used to sit was empty, swept clean. He began to pound both his fists violently against the glass, screaming my name, completely unaware that his nightmare had only just begun. Marcus pulled the phone away from his ear, a triumphant smirk, replacing the terror that had gripped his face. He ended the call and shoved the device back into his tailored pocket, his chest puffing out. "You hear that, Zuri?" he sneered, pointing a finger at me as he slowly backed toward the shattered dining room window. "Your own flesh and blood recognize how completely unhinged you are acting today. You thought you could just lock me out and play these pathetic financial games without consequences. Your father is a deacon. Your mother practically runs the entire congregation. They are not going to let you drag their pristine reputation through the mud over a meaningless mistake. You are going to apologize to me in front of them, and then you are going to restore my accounts." I did not bother to respond to his delusional demands. I simply adjusted my daughter in my arms, savoring the quiet rhythm of her breathing, while Marcus paced the foyer like a restless guard dog. Less than 15 minutes later, the screech of tires echoed from the driveway. Heavy, hurried footsteps pounded against the concrete porch, followed by aggressive knocking that rattled the heavy wooden door. Marcus eagerly swung it open, welcoming his saviors. Deacon Silas and Mother Loretta marched into my living room like they were stepping up to a church pulpit, ready to deliver a fiery sermon. My father wore his Sunday best on a Tuesday afternoon. His silver hair perfectly brushed his jaw, set in a tight line of absolute disapproval. My mother trailed right behind him, clutching her expensive leather handbag like a weapon. Neither of them spared a single glance at the newborn baby resting in my arms. They did not ask about my health, my grueling delivery, or the fact that I had nearly bled out in a hospital room completely alone. Their eyes immediately locked onto Marcus, scanning his tense posture before turning their combined furious glares directly onto me. "Zuri!" My father boomed, his deep voice carrying the heavy authoritative weight he usually reserved for his congregation. "What in the world possesses you to act like a wild, unruly woman? Changing the locks on your husband, moving his belongings out of his own house. You are humiliating this family. Marcus is a good, providing black man. He brings substantial prestige to our church. Do you have any idea how it looks for the deacon's daughter to be throwing her successful husband out on the street?" "I was not on the street," I replied, keeping my tone perfectly measured. "He was in the Maldives, with his 24-year-old intern, while I gave birth to your granddaughter." My mother scoffed loudly, waving her hand through the air as if she were swatting away an annoying insect. She marched over to the coffee table, her eyes landing on the thick, formal manila folder I had set there earlier that morning. She snatched it up, her manicured nails digging into the paper. "Men, step out, Zuri," she snapped, her voice dripping with venomous condescension. "It happens. It is the reality of marriage. A strong woman prays through it and keeps her household intact. You do not throw away a wealthy, providing husband over a brief lapse in judgment. You definitely do not embarrass him like this. You are acting entirely out of spite." She opened the folder, pulling out the official divorce petition I had carefully prepared and signed. Her eyes widened as she read the bold legal heading. Without a second of hesitation, she gripped the thick stack of papers and violently ripped them in half, tossing the shredded pieces onto the rug at my feet. "There will be no divorce in this family," she commanded, glaring down at me. "You always ruin things when you get emotional. You have always been ungrateful. We raised you to support your family, to understand your place. You should be thanking God on your knees that Marcus provides a roof over your head. You should be grateful we let you pay for Jada's expensive HBCU tuition instead of selfishly going to graduate school for yourself. We taught you the value of true sacrifice. We taught you to carry the burden for the betterment of the family. You will clean up this mess. Yes, you will apologize to your husband immediately, and you will learn how to forgive. The sheer audacity of her words hung heavily in the quiet room. She actually believed I owed them something. She actually believed paying my younger sister's exorbitant college tuition, completely sacrificing my own academic future to keep their golden child debt-free, was a privilege they had granted me. They called it family duty. The rest of the world calls it a financial parasite. I looked at the torn divorce papers scattered across the floor, then looked up at my mother's furious, self-righteous face. I felt a cold, sharp smile slowly spread across my lips. You can tear up as many copies as you want, Mother. I said, my voice dropping to a low, icy register that made her visibly flinch. The original documents were already filed with the county courthouse at 8 o'clock this morning. And as for my gratitude, I think I have paid my dues in full. My money built this life, and my money is going to dismantle it. Marcus opened his mouth to shout a threat emboldened by my parents' arrival, but a loud honk from the driveway interrupted him. Through the broken window, I watched a pristine white Range Rover pull up directly behind my parents' sedan. The heavy car doors slammed shut. Heavy footsteps clicked rapidly up the front walkway. The front door swung open once again, completely uninvited. My younger sister Jada strutted into the foyer dripping in designer labels I had paid for, followed closely by her arrogant, privileged white husband Preston, whose presence would turn this hostile family intervention into a total bloodbath. Jada paraded into my living room holding an oversized designer handbag that I had purchased for her last Christmas. She did not even glance at the newborn baby in my arms before crossing her arms and glaring at me. Preston strolled in right behind her, a smug smile plastered across his face as he surveyed the shattered glass on the floor. My father, Deacon Silas, immediately stepped forward to reclaim control of the room, turning his furious gaze back to me. "You are embarrassing this entire family, Zuri!" My father barked, his voice vibrating with rage. "Marcus is a pillar of our church community. He is a good black man who provides for you. Do you know what the congregation will say when they find out you threw him out like garbage? You are going to ruin my standing with the church board." "Your standing with the board is not my responsibility, Dad," I replied, keeping my voice perfectly level. "My responsibility is to myself and my daughter. I will not stay married to a man who abandons me in a delivery room to sleep with a young assistant." My mother Loretta gasped dramatically, stepping forward to jab a manicured finger in my direction. "You always ruin things," she yelled, her face contorting with indignation. "You are acting like a bitter, emotional woman. You should be down on your knees thanking God that a man of his stature chose to marry you. You should be entirely grateful he provides a roof over your head." "Provides for me?" I asked, a cold laugh escaping my lips. "I pay the mortgage on this house, Mother, just like I paid for every single thing you demanded from me over the last 10 years. My mother scoffed loudly, waving her hand in dismissal. "You owe this family, Zuri. You should be grateful we even allowed you to pay for Jada's HBCU tuition. You acting like a martyr because you had to skip graduate school to support your own sister is pathetic. That is what family does. We lift each other up. Jada needed that degree to secure a good husband like Preston, and you did your duty. Now your duty is to fix your broken marriage and save this family from public humiliation." The sheer audacity of her words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. She was openly admitting that they viewed my financial exploitation as a generous privilege they had bestowed upon me. They completely derailed my academic future, forcing me into the corporate grind years early, just so Jada could pledge a sorority and party her way through a prestigious university debt-free. They called it family responsibility, but it was nothing more than a relentless, exhausting black tax that I was expected to pay without a single complaint. Jada stepped forward, adjusting her diamond tennis bracelet with a dramatic sigh. "Honestly, Zuri, you are being completely unreasonable," she whined, her tone dripping with unearned entitlement. "Marcus made a tiny mistake. You are overreacting and trying to destroy everything. How selfish can you be, Preston? And I have a massive charity gala coming up this weekend, and we need Marcus there to introduce us to his wealthy investors. You are jeopardizing my husband's tech startup because you cannot handle a little marital turbulence. Do you even realize how much pressure you are putting on me right now?" Jada continued, her voice rising to a shrill pitch. I have brand deals to negotiate. I cannot have my older sister trending in our social circles for being a bitter single mother. It ruins my aesthetic. Marcus is practically begging you to be reasonable, and you are sitting there holding a grudge over a work trip. You are supposed to be the strong, resilient one. You are supposed to absorb these things so the rest of us can thrive. Preston chuckled softly, shaking his head, as if he were watching a toddler throw a tantrum. He casually stuffed his hands into the pockets of his expensive slacks. Look, Zuri, Preston said, his voice laced with that familiar condescending arrogance he always used when addressing me. You really need to calm down and look at the bigger picture here. Jada is right. Marcus brings serious capital and vital connections to this family. You are just a basic data analyst. You do not understand how high-level wealth management actually operates. You need to swallow your pride, apologize to your husband, and let the men handle the financial logistics. You are acting entirely out of pure irrational emotion. Preston took a deliberate step closer to me, invading my personal space with the clear intention of intimidating me into submission. He looked me up and down, his lips curled into a derisive sneer. Your family is trying to help you, Zuri. You should listen to them. Women in your position, women with very limited earning potential, do not have the luxury of acting out of pride. Marcus has connections I absolutely need for my next funding round. If your little tantrum scares away his investors, I will hold you personally responsible for the financial damage to my startup. I looked around my living room at the four of them. My father, who cared more about his church donations than his daughter's broken heart. My mother, who actively enabled my exploitation to fund her favorite child. My sister, a superficial parasite who only cared about her social calendar. And Preston, the arrogant outsider who thought his skin color and tech bro status gave him the ultimate authority to dictate my life. I adjusted my baby in my arms, standing up slowly from the velvet nursing chair. I am not acting out of emotion, I said, staring directly into Preston's smug blue eyes. I am acting out of precision. I will not take Marcus back. I will not apologize. And I will not spend another single dime financing you arrogant people anymore. Preston let out a sharp, condescending laugh that seemed to echo off the high ceilings of my living room. He uncrossed his arms and began to slowly pace across the hardwood floor, his expensive Italian loafers clicking rhythmically against the polished wood. He looked around the space with an unmistakable expression of profound disgust, running his index finger along the edge of my antique console table as if checking for dust. You really have deluded yourself into thinking you hold any actual power here, Zuri, he said, shaking his head with a mocking, pitying smile. You are acting exactly like the stereotypical angry, emotional woman. It is entirely predictable, and frankly, it is exhausting to watch. He paused by the fireplace, turning his gaze toward my parents, who were nodding along with his every word as if he were delivering absolute gospel. Let me explain some basic economics to you, since your community college background clearly did not cover the realities of high-level wealth. Preston continued, his tone dripping with the kind of weaponized white privilege that made my skin crawl. A man like Marcus is a high-yield asset. He has the pedigree, the network, and the corporate backing. You are just a supporting character in his portfolio. You should really be taking notes from your sister. Jada understood the assignment. She knew how to marry up, how to integrate into a superior social class, and how to genuinely elevate this family from its modest beginnings. You, on the other hand, are trying to drag everyone back down into the dirt just because your feelings got a little bruised. Jada beamed at her husband's backhanded compliment, completely oblivious to the deeply racist undertones embedded in his praise. She flipped her long extensions over her shoulder and glared at me, fully expecting me to crumble under Preston's arrogant lecture. Preston took another step toward the center of the room, puffing his chest out with unearned confidence. You think cutting off your measly paycheck is going to hurt him? You think throwing him out is going to leave him destitute? He let out another booming laugh. Marcus does not need your money, Zuri. We are playing in an entirely different league now. My tech startup just secured a massive $10 million lifeline from a highly exclusive silent investor. Marcus helped me broker the initial introductions. With that kind of capital flowing through our accounts by the end of the week, Marcus will have a permanent executive position on my board. We are going to build an empire, and you are going to be left sitting in this empty, pathetic house counting your pennies and regretting the day you decided to throw a temper tantrum. I did not interrupt his grandiose monologue. I did not raise my voice, and I certainly did not display the angry, emotional reaction he was so desperately trying to provoke. Instead, I gently shifted my sleeping daughter into my left arm, making sure her tiny head was perfectly supported. With my free right hand, I reached into the pocket of my cardigan and pulled out my smartphone. The screen illuminated instantly, displaying the secure encrypted portal for Obsidian Holdings. Preston continued to ramble, his voice growing louder and more animated as he described the lavish lifestyle he and Marcus were about to enjoy. He bragged about the upcoming initial public offering, the luxury cars they planned to purchase, and the elite country clubs that would soon beg for their membership. While he spoke, I navigated to the specific corporate investment portfolio labeled under Preston's tech startup. The $10 million funding agreement was sitting right there in the digital queue, fully approved, but still requiring the final authorizing signature from the majority shareholder of the private equity firm. I opened the document. I scrolled directly to the bottom of the 16th page. I pulled up the digital signature pad, traced my name across the screen with my index finger, and pressed the bright red button labeled Execute Morality Clause Reversal. A small green checkmark appeared on the screen, confirming the immediate and total cancellation of the capital transfer. I locked my phone, slipped it back into my pocket, and finally looked up at Preston. He was still standing in the middle of my living room, out of breath from his own arrogant boasting, looking at me with a triumphant, malicious sneer. "Are you quite finished?" I asked, my voice smooth and utterly devoid of intimidation. Preston scoffed, rolling his eyes. "I am finished when you agree to apologize to your husband and fix this ridiculous mess, Zuri." I offered him a small, chilling smile. "Preston, did your silent investor happen to mention what specifically occurs if you violate the morality clause buried on page 16 of your funding agreement?" Preston's smug expression faltered for a fraction of a second, his brow furrowed in genuine confusion. "What are you talking about? How do you even know about the morality clause? That is highly confidential corporate information." The clause clearly states that any key executive or affiliated board member involved in public scandal, fraud, or gross marital misconduct gives the investment firm the immediate unilateral right to freeze all corporate accounts and permanently withdraw the promised funding. I recited flawlessly from memory, leaning back into my velvet chair. Before Preston could even process my words, a sharp, piercing notification chime erupted from his jacket pocket. He instinctively reached for his phone, pulling it out with a sudden, jerky movement. His eyes darted across the illuminated screen. I watched the exact moment his entire world collapsed. The color completely drained from his face, leaving him a sickly, ghostly shade of white. His jaw dropped open, his eyes widening in absolute, unadulterated horror as he read the automated alert from his banking institution. The $10 million lifeline, the absolute salvation of his crumbling tech startup, had just been completely frozen, revoked, and permanently seized. He froze completely. The color did not just drain from Preston's face. It seemed to vanish from his entire existence as he stared at the frozen banking notification. Jada shrieked, grabbing his arm and desperately demanding to know what was wrong, but he was completely catatonic and unresponsive. My father, refusing to process the magnitude of my financial execution, immediately pivoted to his only concern, which was public optics. Deacon Silas pointed a trembling finger at me, ordering me to attend the upcoming Oakwood Country Club charity gala the following evening to demonstrate unwavering family unity. He demanded I stand beside Marcus in front of the entire congregation and their elite donors, insisting that my compliance was the absolute only way to salvage his pastoral reputation and maintain his precious social standing. I looked at the panicked, pathetic faces of my family and offered a slow, deliberate nod. I agreed to attend their precious gala, knowing perfectly well it would be the exact stage I needed to finalize my absolute destruction of their false empire. The afternoon before the Oakwood Country Club charity gala, the house was draped in a serene golden silence, My newborn daughter was asleep in her custom mahogany crib, leaving me with a rare moment of absolute solitude. I walked into my private home office, locking the heavy solid wood door behind me. I bypassed the standard desktop computer Marcus always assumed was my only workstation and pressed a concealed panel beneath the mahogany bookshelves. A sleek multi-monitor server array hummed to life, bathing the dim room in the cool blue glow of complex financial algorithms and encrypted offshore banking portals. This hidden terminal was the true nerve center of my existence for the last 3 years. This was the birthplace of Obsidian Holdings. As I sat in the ergonomic leather chair, running a final diagnostic check on the massive data dump I was about to unleash on Marcus and his firm, I allowed myself a brief moment to reflect on exactly how I had constructed this empire right under his arrogant nose. Marcus had always believed that my job as a data analyst was a cute dead-end corporate hobby. He thought I spent my days organizing spreadsheets for middle management, bringing home a modest paycheck that he casually referred to as grocery money. What he fundamentally failed to understand was that my specialization was in predictive risk modeling and forensic market anomalies. I did not just look at numbers, I saw the invisible structural flaws in global financial systems. The initial seed of my suspicion was planted 2.5 years into our marriage. I was balancing our joint checkbook when I noticed a highly sophisticated, yet ultimately traceable discrepancy of $7,000. When I gently asked Marcus about it, he aggressively dismissed me, claiming it was a complex margin call from a volatile tech stock. He told me not to worry my pretty little head about high-level wealth management. His condescension was his fatal mistake. That night, while he snored loudly beside me, I logged into his encrypted workstation. It took me less than 40 minutes to crack his rudimentary password. What I found was not a bad stock tip. It was a carefully concealed offshore account, funneling small increments of client capital into a private fund. He was skimming. I could have confronted him right then. I could have filed for divorce and walked away with half of our modest savings. But the sheer arrogance of his betrayal demanded a much more comprehensive destruction. I realized that if Marcus was reckless enough to embezzle funds, the entire corporate culture at his firm, managed by the notoriously greedy Richard Sterling, must be built on a foundation of absolute rot. So I weaponized my silence. I continued to play the quiet, submissive wife. I ironed his tailored suits, cooked his favorite meals, and smiled politely at his condescending corporate dinners. But between the hours of midnight and 4 in the morning, I became a phantom in the financial markets. Using an initial capital investment of just $20,000 from a secret inheritance my late grandmother had left exclusively in my name, I authored a highly aggressive, self-learning algorithmic trading bot. I deployed it into the volatile international cryptocurrency and emerging tech markets. While Marcus was busy taking his mistresses to expensive steakhouses, my algorithm was executing thousands of micro trades a second, exploiting fractional market inefficiencies. Within the first 8 months, my $20,000 had mutated into $4 million. I immediately pulled the capital from the volatile sectors and funneled it into a legally impenetrable anonymous shell corporation based in Delaware. I named it Obsidian Holdings. With substantial liquid capital at my disposal, I transitioned from aggressive day trading to predatory corporate acquisitions. I began quietly purchasing distressed high-yield debt from over-leveraged tech startups and failing commercial real estate ventures. My predictive models were flawless. By the end of my second year in the shadows, Obsidian Holdings possessed a diversified multi-million-dollar portfolio, and I was the sole anonymous majority shareholder. I hired a team of elite, incredibly discreet corporate attorneys who operated strictly on retainer, legally binding them to never reveal my true identity. To the outside world, Obsidian Holdings was a ruthless, faceless private equity firm managed by a ghost. To Marcus, I was still just Zuri, the quiet wife who supposedly didn't understand how a 401k worked. The ultimate phase of my plan was initiated 6 months ago, exactly around the time I discovered I was pregnant. I directed my legal team to begin aggressively buying up the corporate debt of Richard Sterling's wealth management firm. Sterling's company was prestigious on paper, but my forensic audits revealed they were bleeding capital due to the reckless, unregulated trading habits of arrogant managers like Marcus. Sterling was desperately seeking a lifeline. Obsidian Holdings offered to buy out their entire debt portfolio, effectively making my anonymous corporation the senior creditor. In corporate terms, I had just purchased the leash around Richard Sterling's neck, and part of the contractual agreement for that financial buyout was granting Obsidian Holdings unrestricted backdoor access to the firm's internal servers for routine risk assessment. That access allowed me to passively monitor every single keystroke Marcus made. I watched in real time as he arrogantly embezzled millions to fund his lavish lifestyle with Lexi. I documented every forged signature, every illegal wire transfer, and every hidden IP address. I built an airtight federal-level criminal case against my own husband while casually asking him what he wanted for dinner. I snapped out of my memories as the server array chimed, indicating the final audit presentation was successfully compiled and downloaded to my encrypted smartphone. I disconnected the drive and powered down the monitors. The heavy bookshelves slid seamlessly back into place, hiding my empire behind a row of classic literature. I stood up, smoothing the fabric of the emerald silk gown I had chosen for the evening. I walked over to the crib and gently stroked my sleeping daughter's soft cheek. I was no longer the frightened woman crying in a taxicab, nor the naive girl who let her family exploit her. I was the architect of their absolute ruin, and the opening act was about to begin. I picked up my clutch and walked out the door, ready to burn Marcus's world to the ground. The Oakwood Country Club was a fortress of old money and performative morality, dripping in crystal chandeliers and towering extravagant floral arrangements. I arrived alone, wearing a custom-tailored emerald silk gown that demanded attention without begging for it. I stood near the grand staircase, sipping sparkling water when the heavy oak doors swung open. Marcus strutted into the opulent ballroom like a conquering king. He wore a velvet tuxedo jacket, exuding the arrogant confidence of a man who firmly believed his offshore accounts were still safely hidden. Clinging tightly to his arm was Lexi, wearing a completely inappropriate, deeply plunging crimson dress. Marcus had the sheer audacity to parade his mistress through the crowd of high society donors, introducing the 24-year-old intern to the church elders as his brilliant new business partner. My mother, utterly terrified of the whispering guests, rushed over and aggressively hissed at me to go hide in the kitchen so I would not ruin Marcus's mood tonight. I ignored my mother completely and walked directly toward the center of the crowded ballroom. Lexi spotted me approaching and nudged Marcus, a wicked, triumphant sneer twisting her heavily contoured face. She purposely stepped directly into my path, holding a brimming crystal glass of dark red Cabernet. With a dramatic, exaggerated gasp, she tilted her wrist and splashed the dark liquid aggressively across the bodice of my gorgeous emerald gown. The surrounding guests gasped in collective horror, stepping back quickly to avoid the collateral damage. Lexi offered a high-pitched, entirely fake apology, loudly declaring that I looked so much like a tired, invisible housewife that she simply had not seen me standing there. She smirked, leaning in incredibly close to whisper that I should just go home and let the real professionals handle the highly important adults in the room today. I did not break eye contact with her. I calmly signaled a passing waiter, taking a crisp white linen napkin from his polished silver tray. I did not use it to dab at the ruined silk of my dress. Instead, I meticulously wiped a single drop of wine off the face of my wristwatch. Marcus let out a booming, patronizing laugh, loudly telling the surrounding crowd not to worry about my cheap accessories. He proudly announced that I had bought that knockoff watch on my measly analyst salary just to feel important among his wealthy peers. I polished the intricate diamond-encrusted dial of the authentic $150,000 Patek Philippe Grand Complications timepiece. I bought it to celebrate the day my private equity firm acquired its first $1 billion in assets, while Marcus was busy maxing out his credit cards to buy Lexi cheap designer bags. I tossed the stained napkin onto Lexi's expensive heels and walked straight past them toward the main stage. The charity auctioneer had just concluded his long, boring speech inviting the top donors to step up and proudly present their annual contributions to the foundation. Marcus eagerly pushed his way to the front of the crowd, pulling a large, oversized novelty check from his tailored jacket. He planned to publicly donate $100,000 from our joint account to solidify his prestigious reputation within the local community. I glided up the carpeted stairs and stepped directly up to the grand podium, effortlessly taking the microphone from the stunned auctioneer. The entire ballroom fell into a hushed, heavily expectant silence. My father beamed from the front row, clearly believing I was about to deliver a submissive, apologetic speech praising my wonderful, providing husband. Marcus stood at the base of the stage holding his ridiculous fake check, waiting for me to sing his praises to the elite crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen," I announced, my voice echoing crystal clear through the massive ballroom speakers. "My husband Marcus is a man who truly understands the absolute value of successfully moving capital. He is so exceptionally dedicated to wealth management that he decided to personally handle a very special transaction this week." I pulled a small remote from my clutch and pointed it directly at the audiovisual booth in the back of the room. The massive projector screen behind me hummed to life, illuminating the entire hall with blinding white light. Instead of a heartwarming slideshow or a charitable foundation logo, the screen displayed a meticulously detailed, heavily highlighted financial audit. It showed 56 separate illegal wire transfers moving millions of embezzled client funds directly from Marcus's corporate wealth management firm into a completely fraudulent shell company. The crowd erupted into a chaotic symphony of shocked gasps and horrified whispers as they recognized their own stolen investment accounts, projected in brilliant high definition across the main screen for all of high society to clearly see. Every single transaction bore his personal electronic signature, linking him to the undeniable corporate theft. The perfect reputation my husband had desperately tried to construct was destroyed. Marcus stood paralyzed on the ballroom floor as the projected audit illuminated his financial crimes. The high society guests erupted into a chaotic chorus of gasps, pointing fingers, and furious whispers. He desperately waved his hands, trying to block the blinding projector light. But the evidence of his embezzlement remained towering behind me. He scrambled up the stage steps, his tuxedo jacket wrinkling as he lunged toward the microphone I had just set down. He tapped the mic aggressively, shouting that this was all a massive misunderstanding. He claimed his soon-to-be ex-wife was simply projecting fabricated documents because she was wildly jealous of his new business partner. Lexi, emboldened by his pathetic attempt at damage control, marched right up to the edge of the stage. She crossed her arms, her stained dress clinging to her, and glared up at me with absolute venom. "You are completely insane, Zuri!" Lexi screamed over the rising noise of the restless crowd. "You cannot just barge into a private charity gala and project fake bank statements to ruin Marcus. I know exactly who the event organizers are. I am going to have you permanently banned from this venue and arrested for criminal defamation. Security needs to drag you out of here right now before I press charges myself." I looked down at her, completely unfazed by her shrill, desperate threats. I slowly reached into my clutch and pulled out my smartphone. I calmly scrolled through my contacts, found the number I needed, and pressed the dial button. I connected my phone via Bluetooth directly to the massive ballroom audio system. The ringing tone echoed through the clear speakers, instantly silencing the murmuring crowd. Marcus froze, his eyes darting between me and the glowing screen of my phone. The line clicked open. A deep, authoritative voice boomed through the ballroom. "Richard speaking," the voice answered. It was Richard Sterling, the notoriously ruthless chief executive officer of the wealth management firm where Marcus and Lexi were currently employed. "Good evening, Richard," I said, leaning closer to the microphone so my voice blended seamlessly with his over the speakers. "This is Zuri Silas. We are currently live at the Oakwood Country Club Charity Gala. Marcus and your junior assistant Lexi are standing right in front of me." Marcus turned a sickening shade of pale green. He tried to grab the microphone from my hand, but I smoothly stepped just out of his reach. "Zuri, I have been reviewing the preliminary audit files you sent over this morning," Richard said, his tone thick with barely contained fury. "I am looking at 56 unauthorized transfers. Is Marcus trying to deny the forensic data?" Lexi let out a confused, high-pitched gasp. "Mr. Sterling," she stuttered, staring up at the speakers in pure shock. Why are you talking to Zuri? She is just a low-level data analyst. She does not know anything about our client portfolios. She is faking those documents because she is jealous of our relationship. When Richard finally spoke again, his voice was absolute ice. Lexi, you foolish little girl, he growled. Zuri is not a low-level data analyst. She is the lead forensic auditor for Obsidian Holdings. Her parent company just bought out our firm's entire corporate debt yesterday. She practically owns our building. She spent the last 3 years quietly reviewing every single risk liability in our system, including the massive financial liabilities created by my arrogant wealth managers. The collective gasp from the country club crowd was deafening. My father, Deacon Silas, slumped back into his front row seat, his jaw resting near his chest as the reality of my actual career finally crashed down on him. For years, my family had openly mocked my quiet, steady job. They told me I lacked ambition. They praised Marcus for his flashy suits and corporate jargon, unaware that I was the predator sitting quietly at the top of the financial food chain, tracking his every mistake. I did not just fetch coffee. I identified corporate rot, and Marcus was the biggest piece of rot in the entire firm. Marcus, you absolute disgrace, Richard continued. You thought you could embezzle client funds into an offshore shell company without raising a single red flag. You thought the board would not notice millions vanishing under your direct supervision. You are officially suspended without pay, effective immediately. Do not even think about stepping foot inside the corporate building tomorrow. Our legal team is already cooperating fully with federal authorities. We are handing over all the hard drives you thought you wiped clean. Richard, wait, please. Marcus begged, his voice cracking as he stared up at the ceiling speakers. I can explain everything. I was going to put the money back. It was just a temporary liquidity bridge for an investment. Save your breath for the federal prosecutors, Marcus, Richard snapped. And Lexi, considering your signature is on 11 of those fraudulent transfer authorizations, your employment is terminated immediately. You can collect your final paycheck from the police station. The line went completely dead with a sharp, echoing click. Lexi burst into hysterical, uncontrollable sobs, slowly sinking to her bare knees, right there on the expensive ballroom carpet. She covered her face with her hands, entirely ruined. Marcus did not cry. He snapped. The realization that his wealth, his prestige, and his freedom were entirely gone shattered his mind. He let out a feral roar and charged across the stage. He lunged directly at me, his hands outstretched violently, aiming for my throat. I did not flinch. I did not take a single step backward. Before his hands could reach me, 3 event security guards materialized from the shadows of the curtain. I pay their salaries directly through the venue's parent company. They tackled Marcus mid-air, slamming him brutally onto the hard wooden floor of the stage. He thrashed and screamed like a wild animal as they pinned his arms firmly behind his back. The crisp morning sun filtered through the sheer curtains of my living room, casting a warm golden glow across the polished hardwood floors. I sat in my favorite velvet chair, sipping a steaming cup of herbal tea, while my daughter slept soundly in her bassinet nearby. The chaotic symphony of the charity gala felt like a distant, fading memory. Marcus was sitting in a holding cell, stripped of his tailored suits and unearned arrogance, while federal investigators picked apart his ruined career. I had finally reclaimed the absolute peace that he had spent 5 years trying to destroy. I took another slow, deliberate sip of my tea, savoring the absolute silence of my newly secured home. That beautiful, pristine silence was violently shattered by the sound of tires screeching onto my driveway. Heavy, frantic footsteps pounded up the front walkway. Before the doorbell could even ring, the heavy brass knocker began banging furiously against the solid oak door. I did not rush to answer. I set my teacup down, smoothed the fabric of my silk robe, and walked casually toward the entryway. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the door open. Jada stumbled into the foyer looking absolutely deranged. My younger sister, the flawless golden child of our family, was a complete and utter wreck. Her expensive designer extensions were tangled, her makeup was severely smudged from crying, and she was wearing yesterday's expensive clothes. She practically shoved past me, marching directly into the center of my living room with a look of pure, unadulterated panic masking her usual haughty entitlement. She threw her expensive designer handbag onto the sofa, completely disregarding the fragile peace I had just established. "You have to fix this right now, Zuri!" Jada screamed, her voice cracking, as she frantically waved her smartphone in the air. Preston is having a complete mental breakdown in our kitchen. He is sitting on the expensive marble island, violently pulling at his own hair and sobbing uncontrollably. His entire tech startup is collapsing right in front of us. The silent investor officially pulled all $10 million of funding this morning. They froze all the corporate accounts, and the board members are already drafting letters of resignation. His entire company is going bankrupt, and it is all your fault. You completely humiliated Marcus last night, and the resulting scandal spooked Preston's investors. Now we are totally ruined. I leaned against the entryway arch, crossing my arms over my chest. Preston's startup collapsed because it was built on a foundation of terrible business decisions and hollow arrogance. Jada. It has absolutely nothing to do with me projecting Marcus's embezzlement records at a charity gala. Jada stomped her expensive heel against my floor, her face twisting into a hideous mask of desperate rage. "Do not stand there and give me a lecture about business decisions," she shrieked, tears of sheer panic streaming down her ruined face. "You do not understand what is happening to me. We have 3 luxury cars. We have a massive country club membership due next week. We have a $7,000 a month mortgage on a house we can barely afford. Preston's credit cards are all declining. You need to write me a check right this second. I need at least $50,000 to cover our immediate overhead until Preston can secure a bridge loan. Go get your checkbook, Zuri, right now." I stared at her, genuinely astounded by the sheer magnitude of her delusion. "You barge into my house, blame me for your husband's massive financial failures, and then demand I write you a $50,000 check." "Yes," Jada yelled, throwing her hands up in the air as if stating the most obvious fact in the world. "Because you are the older sister. Because this is exactly how our family works. You are supposed to take care of me. You owe me this, Zuri. You always pay the black tax, so the rest of us can elevate this family's image in front of the entire community. Mom and Dad raised you to be the provider, the quiet workhorse who sacrifices everything for our overall benefit. I am the beautiful face of this family's ultimate success. I married the wealthy white tech founder to bring us high society prestige and elevate our neighborhood status. I did my part. You are supposed to be the quiet, responsible one who absorbs the financial burdens. That is your role. You sacrificed your graduate school fund so I could pledge my sorority debt-free, and you are going to write me a check right now to save my marriage." She genuinely believed her own toxic, parasitic narrative. She viewed me not as a sister, but as a mandatory, endless line of credit designed solely to fund her superficial existence. I did not raise my voice. I walked past her, heading straight into the kitchen. I opened the tall utility closet near the pantry, reached inside, and grabbed a long wooden-handled mop. I walked back into the living room and tossed the mop directly at Jada. She instinctively caught it, staring at the cleaning tool with an expression of profound, offended confusion. "What is this?" she demanded, dropping the mop onto the floor as if it had burned her manicured hands. "That is your new reality," I said, my voice completely devoid of any sympathy. "The black tax is officially cancelled, Jada. I am not writing you a check. I am not saving Preston's failing startup. If you need $50,000 to pay your massive mortgage, I highly suggest you pick up that mop and start looking for a custodial position. I hear the Oakwood Country Club is hiring cleanup staff after last night's event." Jada opened her mouth to scream another entitled demand, but a sharp, authoritative knock at the front door interrupted her. I walked over and opened it. A tall, serious-looking man in a tailored gray suit stood on the porch holding a thick, heavily stamped manila envelope in his right hand. He did not introduce himself or offer a polite greeting. He looked right past me, his cold, professional eyes landing directly on my sister. "Are you Jada Sterling?" the man asked firmly. Jada hesitated, nervously stepping forward. "Yes, I am," Who are you? The man stepped inside, thrusting the thick envelope forcefully against Jada's chest. You have been formally served, he announced, turning around and walking briskly back down the driveway. Jada fumbled with the heavy envelope, her hands shaking violently as she tore the paper open. She pulled out a thick stack of legal documents stamped with heavy red ink. She scanned the first page, her eyes widening in absolute horror. She gasped, dropping the papers onto the floor next to the mop. This is a formal foreclosure notice, Jada whispered, her entire body trembling. The bank is seizing our house. They are demanding immediate total repayment of the mortgage. But how is this happening so fast? The silent investor only pulled the funding this morning. I smiled, looking down at the legal documents scattered across my floor. The reality of her impending poverty was finally setting in. I did not pull the funding, Jada, I said, my voice sharp and final. I simply accelerated the massive debt collection. Jada collapsed onto her designer knees, right there in my foyer, sobbing hysterically as she clutched the foreclosure notice against her chest. I did not offer her a tissue. I did not bend down to comfort her. I simply opened my front door wider, letting the crisp morning breeze sweep into the house, and waited in absolute silence until she finally gathered enough strength to drag herself and her ruined pride back out to her leased vehicle. As her car sped away, leaving black tire marks on my pristine driveway, my phone vibrated in my pocket. The caller identification displayed a demanding, bold title. It was my father, Deacon Silas. He did not send a text asking how I was doing. He left a terse, heavily authoritative voicemail ordering me to appear in his private pastoral office at exactly noon. He stated that my rebellious, destructive behavior had escalated to a point requiring immediate spiritual and familial intervention, threatening severe consequences if I dared to disobey his pastoral command. I arrived at the sprawling multi-million-dollar church campus precisely at 12. The massive sanctuary, a towering monument to my father's overwhelming ego, stood proudly in the center of our community. I walked past the stained glass windows and the glittering fountain, heading straight for the newly constructed administrative wing. This extravagant addition to the building featured imported marble floors and custom oak paneling. I pushed open the heavy wooden doors to his private suite. Deacon Silas sat behind a massive mahogany desk, looking less like a humble servant of God and much more like a furious corporate dictator. My mother Loretta sat rigidly in the corner leather chair, dabbing at her dry eyes with a lace handkerchief to emphasize her performative distress. "Close the door, Zuri," my father barked, not bothering to offer a polite greeting. "You have crossed a dangerous line that I cannot allow to stand today." Jada called us completely hysterical this morning. She told us what you did to her and Preston. You deliberately sabotaged her marriage and her home. You publicly humiliated your providing husband last night in front of my most vital congregation members. I will not have a defiant, bitter woman tearing apart the respected fabric of this entire family. I remained standing, crossing my arms as I looked down at him. I defended myself against a man who abandoned me and stole our savings, Dad. Jada and Preston brought their financial ruin upon themselves through pure greed. My father slammed his fist furiously onto the polished surface of his expensive desk. "You are completely blind to the bigger picture," he yelled, his face turning a dangerous shade of red. "Marcus is a vital asset to this ministry. He has been faithfully paying the massive monthly mortgage on this very building to keep our church afloat, while our tithes have been significantly down. He covers the debts you could never dream of paying on your tiny salary. By destroying his career, you are directly attacking the house of God. I am the head of this family, and as your pastor, I am telling you that if you do not fix this mess, I will personally excommunicate you from this community. You will be dead to this church." I let out a sharp, incredulous laugh. "You want to excommunicate me because I refuse to subsidize a cheating embezzler and your spoiled youngest daughter. You should be sacrificing for this church just like the rest of us." My father roared back, his self-righteous indignation blinding him to his own hypocrisy. "Do you think this beautiful new administrative wing just miraculously fell from the sky? We had to make incredibly tough choices for the greater good of this congregation. We had to utilize every available resource. Where do you think the seed money for this specific expansion came from, Zuri? I took your entire college fund when you were 18. I took the $50,000 your grandmother left for your education and poured it directly into the foundation of this building. It was God's will. It was a necessary sacrifice for the community, and you survived just fine without it. You owe your continued submission to this family because we know what is best for the overall legacy. The sheer, unadulterated evil of his confession hung heavily in the quiet office. He was openly admitting to stealing my educational future. He had secretly drained my grandmother's hard-earned money, forcing me to take out massive student loans and work 3 exhausting jobs just to get my basic degree all so he could build a fancy office to stroke his pastoral ego. He justified his theft as divine intervention, just like he justified my mother forcing me to pay for Jada's tuition. They were nothing but parasites hiding behind a pulpit. You stole my future to build this office, I said softly, my voice devoid of any warmth. You let me work myself to the bone while you sat behind this mahogany desk feeling holy. It was a required family sacrifice, he shouted, standing up from his chair to intimidate me. And now you are going to sacrifice your petty pride to save Marcus so he can keep paying the mortgage on this building. I reached into my designer handbag, pulling out a thick, legally binding document stamped with the state seal. I walked directly up to his desk and dropped the heavy paperwork right over his open Bible. Marcus was not paying the mortgage, Dad, I stated, staring right into his shocked eyes. He was entirely defaulting on it for the last 10 months. He actually embezzled the church's money to pay for his mistress's luxury apartments. The bank initiated total foreclosure proceedings on this holy sanctuary last week. I bought the church's entire debt portfolio yesterday morning through my private equity firm. I officially own this entire building now. You and your entire congregation have exactly 30 days to immediately vacate my property. I turned my back on my father's stunned silence and walked out of the newly built administrative wing, leaving the heavy wooden doors to close firmly behind me. My focus immediately shifted to the next parasite on my list. 3 days later, I found myself sitting in a sleek glass-walled conference room in downtown Atlanta. Preston had frantically filed an emergency injunction and a formal arbitration demand against Obsidian Holdings, desperately attempting to sue me for predatory lending and tortious interference. He sat directly across the polished mahogany table, flanked by 3 highly expensive, impeccably dressed corporate attorneys. Preston leaned back in his ergonomic leather chair, exuding a repulsive level of unearned confidence. He smirked, clearly assuming that my physical presence in the room without an entire legal team meant I was completely out of my depth. He adjusted his silk tie and loudly instructed his lead attorney to commence the absolute destruction of my financial portfolio. The lead attorney began reciting a convoluted statement regarding corporate sabotage. Preston quickly held up his hand, interrupting his own expensive legal counsel because his massive ego demanded that he deliver the fatal blow himself. Let me translate all of this heavy legal terminology into something you can actually comprehend. Zuri, Preston said, leaning his elbows onto the gleaming table. You thought you could just press a button and destroy my tech startup out of pure spite. But real corporate law does not operate on your petty emotional whims. We are officially citing promissory estoppel, equitable relief, and gross breach of fiduciary duty. I know those are big, complicated words for someone with your limited community college background, so I will make it very simple. You illegally froze my funding. My attorneys are going to utterly obliterate your little private equity firm. We are going to seize your assets, take your house, and garnish whatever measly wages you manage to scrape together for the rest of your miserable life. You are completely legally illiterate, Zuri. You brought a knife to a nuclear war. I sat perfectly still, my hands resting calmly on the cool surface of the conference table. I did not interrupt his arrogant speech. I let him bask in his imaginary victory, allowing the heavy silence of the room to amplify his foolishness. Preston scoffed, shaking his head as he looked at his lead attorney. She does not even understand the magnitude of the trouble she is in. Preston laughed, pointing a dismissive finger at me. This is exactly what happens when you let uneducated, emotional people temporarily hold the reins of real capital. They panic. They make stupid mistakes. You should have just stayed in your lane, Zuri. You should have just let Marcus handle the big boy business. Now you are going to lose absolutely everything. I offered him a slow, chilling smile. I reached down into my designer leather tote bag and pulled out a single neatly organized manila folder. I did not look at Preston. I directed my attention entirely to the three high-priced corporate attorneys sitting rigidly beside him. Gentlemen, I began in my voice smooth, authoritative, and completely devoid of fear. Before you officially file any of those disastrous career-ending arbitration documents on behalf of your client, I highly suggest you review the exact nature of the company you are currently representing. I slid the manila folder across the smooth mahogany table. It stopped precisely in front of the silver-haired lead attorney. He hesitated for a fraction of a second before flipping open the heavy cover. Your client, I continued, leaning forward slightly, assumes my community college background makes me stupid. He assumes that because I am a black woman, I do not understand how to properly audit a tech startup. But what Preston failed to realize is that when Obsidian Holdings drafts a funding agreement, we require unrestricted administrative access to all internal company servers for a routine preliminary risk assessment. Preston's smug smile instantly vanished. He sat up straight, his blue eyes darting nervously toward the open folder in front of his lawyer. "What is in that folder, Zuri?" he demanded, his voice suddenly lacking its previous booming confidence. "You do not have authorization to access my private communications." "I have absolute authorization," I corrected him sharply. "You signed the waiver on page 4 of the initial term sheet. You were just too arrogant to actually read the fine print." The lead attorney began to flip through the heavily highlighted documents inside the folder. The color rapidly drained from his experienced face. He pushed his reading glasses up the bridge of his nose, his breathing becoming noticeably shallow as he scanned the printed emails. "Let us read a few highlights for the room, shall we?" I offered cheerfully. Document A is an internal email Preston sent to his chief financial officer last Tuesday. In it, Preston explicitly admits to cooking the financial books, artificially inflating his daily active user metrics by 400% to deliberately defraud my investment firm. Preston gasped, his hands gripping the edge of the table. "That is taken completely out of context," he shouted, panic seeping into his tone. "I assure you, federal fraud investigators love context," I replied coldly. "But let us move on to Document B. This is a private email chain Preston sent to his college fraternity brothers just last month, discussing his marriage to my sister Jada." The lead attorney glared at Preston in horror. "Preston uses highly offensive racial slurs to describe my parents," I recited flawlessly. "He explicitly boasts that marrying a materialistic black woman like Jada was a calculated public relations move to make his all-white tech board look progressive to potential investors. He literally calls my sister a convenient prop." Preston whispered, his voice shaking violently. "You cannot use any of that." "It is fully admissible during discovery," the lead attorney snapped aggressively, slamming his leather briefcase shut. "Consider our legal representation officially terminated, effective immediately." I watched as Preston stared blankly at the empty space left by his departing legal team, completely defeated. I gathered my folders, stood up from the mahogany table, and walked out of the glass conference room without offering him a parting glance. I drove to my suburban home, looking forward to spending an evening with my daughter. I poured a glass of sparkling water, allowing myself to relax on the sofa. That tranquility was suddenly interrupted by a frantic pounding on my front door. I checked the security monitor mounted on the wall. Standing on my porch, shivering in the cool night air, was Lexi. She looked nothing like the arrogant mistress who purposely spilled red wine on my silk gown at the charity gala. Her designer clothes were gone, replaced by a cheap hoodie and stained sweatpants. Her blonde hair was a tangled mess, and her face was pale, stripped of expensive makeup. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the door open, keeping the security chain firmly in place. "Zuri, please, you have to let me inside," Lexi begged, her voice trembling as she hugged her arms across her chest. "I have nowhere else to go. My landlord evicted me this morning because my bank accounts are frozen. Richard fired me. No firm will hire me, and Marcus is broke. I am ruined. Please give me 5 minutes." I unlatched the chain and stepped back, gesturing for her to enter the foyer. I did not offer her a seat. I stood under the entryway chandelier and waited for her to present her inevitable scheme. Lexi reached into her hoodie and pulled out two silver external hard drives. She held them up like a desperate salesperson pitching a worthless product. "I know how much you want to destroy Marcus," she said, her eyes darting nervously around my pristine home. When federal investigators raided his office, he managed to smuggle these drives out. He hid them in my apartment before they suspended him. These contain the ultimate proof of his corporate espionage. He was not just embezzling client funds, Zuri. He was stealing proprietary trading algorithms from your private equity firm and selling them to international competitors. This is the final nail in his coffin. I looked at the hard drives, my expression completely neutral. "And what exactly do you want in exchange for this stolen corporate property, Lexi?" $50,000 in cash, she demanded, trying to summon a fraction of her former arrogance. "I need cash to leave the state and start over. $50,000 is nothing to you. Pay me right now, and I will hand over the definitive proof that will lock Marcus away in federal prison for 20 years. I crossed my arms and studied her pathetic posture. "Why should I pay you a single cent for documents I already possess through my forensic audits?" Lexi took a shaky step forward, her voice dropping into a conspiratorial whisper. "Because I can give you the truth about why he did this to you. Marcus never loved me. He used me because I was easily manipulated. But he used you because he actively wanted to destroy you. He confessed everything after drinking too much whiskey in the Maldives. He told me he hated your quiet, calculating intelligence. He realized very early in your marriage that you were smarter, stronger, and more capable than he could ever dream of being. It intimidated his fragile ego. He intentionally orchestrated years of emotional abuse, financial control, and blatant disrespect to break your self-esteem. He needed you to feel small so he could feel powerful. He dragged me to that maternity ward to twist the knife, hoping to break your spirit." She thrust the hard drives closer to my chest. "He wanted to ruin you because he was terrified of you. Pay me the cash, Zuri, and take the final weapon to crush him." I slowly uncrossed my arms. I reached out and calmly plucked the two silver hard drives directly out of her trembling hands. Lexi smiled, a flicker of greedy hope illuminating her exhausted face. She held out her empty palm eagerly, waiting for me to write her a massive check. Instead, I dropped the hard drives into the deep pocket of my cardigan. I looked her directly in the eyes. "I appreciate the confirmation regarding his pathetic psychological motives, Lexi, but I am not giving you $50,000. Lexi gasped, her face twisting into a mask of furious indignation. "You cannot just steal those from me. We had a deal. I brought you the ultimate evidence. You have to pay me so I can escape the city before the investigators find me." "We never had a deal," I corrected her sharply. "You showed up possessing stolen corporate property and attempted to extort a major shareholder of Obsidian Holdings. Furthermore, you seem to have forgotten that your signature is prominently featured on 11 of those fraudulent wire transfers I projected at the country club gala." "A victim," I repeated, letting the word roll off my tongue as if it were coated in poison. I took a slow, deliberate step toward her, my presence suddenly dominating the entire foyer. "You do not get to invoke the language of victimhood now that your fraudulent lifestyle has collapsed, Lexi. A victim is coerced. A victim is trapped. You were neither." Lexi wrapped her arms around herself, trembling violently, but I refused to let her look away. "Let us examine your so-called victimization." I continued, my voice eerily calm, but sharp enough to cut glass. "Were you a victim when you happily boarded a first-class flight to the Maldives, knowing perfectly well that the trip was funded by our joint marital savings? Were you a victim when you confidently strolled into a maternity ward, clinging to my husband's arm, smirking at the nurses while wearing a designer sundress you couldn't possibly afford on an intern's salary? You were not crying then. You were absolutely glowing with the thrill of replacing me." "He manipulated me," Lexi sobbed loudly, dropping to her knees on my hardwood floor. "He told me you were cold to him. He promised we were going to build an empire together. I am just a 24-year-old girl, Zuri. We are both women. We both fell for the lies of a powerful, toxic man. You have to understand that I looked down at her pathetic kneeling form. Do not ever attempt to group us together in some twisted narrative of sisterhood. I did not fall for his lies, I audited them, and you did not fall for his charm, you fell for his credit limit. When you intentionally splashed a glass of Cabernet across my custom emerald gown at the charity gala, leaning in to whisper that I was an invisible tired housewife, was that Marcus manipulating you? Or was that just the cruel, arrogant reality of who you truly are when you think you hold all the power? Lexi's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. The absolute truth of her own malicious behavior paralyzed her. You are not a victim of Marcus, I stated coldly, crossing my arms over my chest. You were his willing, enthusiastic accomplice who gladly spent stolen funds on luxury vacations while I was giving birth completely alone. The only you are standing in my foyer crying is because the money ran out and you got caught. I do not need these hard drives to sink Marcus, nor do I need them to sink you. I already provided the Federal Bureau of Investigation with a comprehensive, airtight forensic paper trail mapping out the entire espionage network. Lexi gasped, her eyes darting toward the front door. In fact, I said, a slow smile spreading across my face. I called the lead federal agent exactly 5 minutes before I unlocked my front door to let you inside. Lexi's eyes widened in absolute terror. The heavy silence of the suburban neighborhood was suddenly pierced by the wail of approaching sirens. The flashing red and blue lights began to reflect brightly against the frosted glass of my front window. The sirens grew deafeningly loud, stopping directly behind her cheap rental car parked on my street. I smiled peacefully. Lexi lunged for the door, but I blocked her escape. 2 federal agents marched up the porch steps. They opened the screen door, grabbed Lexi by her stained sweatshirt, and dragged her outside in heavy steel handcuffs while reading her Miranda rights. I watched the cruiser speed away. I locked the deadbolt, walked upstairs, and enjoyed an uninterrupted night of peaceful sleep. The following afternoon, I sat in my home office reviewing structural blueprints for the commercial property I planned to build over the old church grounds. My daughter was babbling happily in her colorful playpen. The doorbell rang, sounding a slow, hesitant chime that lacked the aggressive energy Jada usually brought to my doorstep. I checked the security camera. My mother, Loretta, stood nervously on the welcome mat. She wore a faded trench coat, her shoulders slumped heavily, her posture radiating utter defeat. I slowly opened the door. Loretta clutched her leather purse like a lifeline. Can I come in, Zuri? She asked, her voice remarkably small. I want to see my granddaughter. I stepped aside, allowing her into the foyer. She walked into the living room and collapsed onto the velvet sofa, burying her face in her shaking hands. Everything is ruined, Zuri, my mother sobbed. The congregation knows about the church foreclosure. The deacons held an emergency meeting this morning and stripped your father of his title. The community boards banished me from every charity committee. My former friends will not answer my calls. Everyone knows Preston is a massive fraud. We have nothing left. I sat opposite her, my face a mask of icy indifference. Your legacy was built entirely on stolen educational funds and fake prestige, Mother. It was destined to collapse under its own rotten weight. Loretta looked up, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. How can you be so cold? Look at that baby girl sitting right there. Do you want her to grow up in a world where families abandon each other when things get difficult? You need to show some Christian mercy, Zuri. You need to use your wealth to restore this broken family for the sake of your child. I leaned forward, resting my elbows firmly on my knees. Do not ever attempt to use my daughter to emotionally manipulate me. Let us talk exactly about where you were 7 years ago. Loretta froze instantly, her performative tears drying up as genuine guilt crossed her face. I was 26 years old. I recounted, my voice sharp and completely unwavering. I was 6 months pregnant with my first child. Marcus was out of town. I started bleeding heavily in the middle of the night. I called you, absolutely terrified, begging you to drive me to the emergency room. Do you remember what you told me? Loretta looked down at her shaking hands, unable to meet my intense gaze. I had important responsibilities, Zuri, she whispered defensively. You had a beauty pageant, I corrected her fiercely. Jada was competing for a title. You told me to call a taxi because you could not possibly miss watching Jada walk across the main stage in her expensive evening gown. I rode in the back of a dirty cab entirely alone, bleeding out on the cold vinyl seats. I lay in a sterile hospital bed for 2 entire days, mourning the loss of my baby completely alone. You did not visit me a single time. You were too busy throwing a lavish celebration dinner because Jada won second runner-up. You abandoned your bleeding daughter in a hospital so you could take pictures with a cheap plastic tiara. Do not sit on my sofa and preach to me about family loyalty. That was a long time ago, Loretta cried desperately, trying to change the subject. I made a terrible mistake. But we are facing an emergency right now, Zuri. Your father and I received a final notice from our bank this morning. Because Preston defaulted on the huge commercial loans he took out under our names, our house is being officially seized. We are going to be completely homeless by the end of the month. I am begging you. Just write me a personal loan to pay off the mortgage balance. I will pay you back. I sat back in my chair. I am not a charitable foundation mother. I do not lend money to people with a documented history of financial fraud and severe emotional abuse. Loretta gasped loudly, falling heavily to her knees on my hardwood floor. Please, Zuri, I will do absolutely anything. I will work for it. Just tell me what to do. You want to work for it? Fine. I have an open position at Obsidian Holdings. My corporate headquarters downtown requires a new custodial staff member for the overnight shift. You will be responsible for scrubbing toilets, emptying trash cans, and polishing marble floors in the executive suites. It pays minimum wage devoid of any healthcare benefits. You will clock in at 10 at night and clock out at 6 in the morning. If you work every single shift without complaining, you might afford a modest one-bedroom apartment. Loretta stared at me in sheer horror. She slowly stood up from the floor, her expression twisting rapidly from desperate sorrow into absolute disgust. You want me, a respected pastor's wife, to scrub filthy toilets in a corporate office building? You want me to empty your trash cans like some uneducated peasant? I would rather sleep on the freezing street than subject myself to that kind of intense, humiliating degradation. You are a wicked, spiteful daughter. Then I strongly suggest you start packing your bags, mother, I replied smoothly, pointing directly at the front door. Because the street is exactly where you are going. Loretta snatched her purse from the sofa, turning her back on me and storming out of the house. I silently watched her walk down the dark driveway, empty-handed, her socialite pride securing her absolute downfall. Evening shadows stretched across the lawn as the reality of my mother's departure settled into the quiet air. I turned away from the heavy oak door, engaging the deadbolt and sliding the chain into its groove. My house was a fortress, a sanctuary I designed to keep the toxic elements of my past locked out. I walked upstairs to the nursery, where my daughter slept peacefully, shielded from the financial carnage erupting across the city. Federal indictments against Marcus were unsealed that afternoon, splashing his face across every major news network and financial blog in the country. His passport had been seized, his offshore accounts frozen, and the threat of a 20-year prison sentence hung heavily over his head. I knew a desperate man with a shattered ego was a dangerous variable, so I prepared my home accordingly. I poured a glass of water in the kitchen, enjoying the serene atmosphere, when a violent crash shattered the tranquility. The heavy glass pane of my patio door shattered into glittering pieces across the hardwood floor. I did not scream. I did not run. I calmly set my glass on the marble island and walked toward the living room. Marcus climbed through the broken frame, his suit torn, his face covered in terrified sweat. He looked nothing like the arrogant manager who confidently paraded his mistress through the maternity ward weeks ago. He was a cornered animal, bleeding from a cut on his cheek and breathing heavily. His wild, bloodshot eyes darted around the living room until they locked onto me. I stood perfectly still, radiating absolute control, while he stepped over the shattered glass. "Where is my daughter, Zuri?" Marcus growled, his voice a hiss as he stomped toward the center of the room. "You are not going to take everything from me and walk away. Federal prosecutors offered me a plea deal this morning, but they want me to surrender every single asset I have left to pay restitution. I am facing decades in a federal penitentiary because you decided to play corporate mastermind. You destroyed my entire life, and now I am taking my child. You are going to write me a check to secure her safe return, or I am taking her out of this state tonight. She is my ultimate leverage, and you are going to fund my escape." I looked at him with utter revulsion, marveling at the pathetic reality of the man I once vowed to submit to. "You broke into my home, destroyed my property, and now you are actively attempting to kidnap an infant to extort your way out of a federal indictment. You have officially lost your mind, Marcus." He lunged forward, closing the distance until he was standing mere inches from my face. He raised his hand, pointing his finger down at me, attempting to use his physical size to force my submission. "Do not speak to me like I am some idiot you can manage." He spat spittle flying from his lips. "You spent 5 years acting like a quiet, submissive wife. You sat in the corner, ironed my shirts, and let me run the household because that is exactly what a good woman is supposed to do. A submissive wife should never outsmart her providing husband. You deceived me. You hid your corporate power, auditing my accounts behind my back, plotting to humiliate me while smiling in my face. You emasculated me in front of the entire financial district. I am the head of this family. I am the man who dictates the rules. You are nothing but a deceptive, emotional woman who got lucky with a few spreadsheets. I will not let you win this game. Tell me where you hid the baby right now before I tear this entire house apart." I did not flinch, nor did I step back to yield my physical space. I stared directly into his furious, bloodshot eyes, completely unbothered by his aggressive posturing. "You demanded a submissive wife because you lacked the actual intellect to partner with a powerful woman, Marcus. You needed me to shrink so your fragile ego could artificially inflate. You stole our joint savings to fund luxury vacations with a junior assistant because you thought I was too stupid to check the routing numbers. You abandoned me in a hospital delivery room because you assumed my quiet nature meant I lacked a spine. My silence was never submission. It was absolute, calculated observation. I audited your pathetic life, and I foreclosed on your unearned arrogance." Marcus raised his fist, his face twisting into a mask of violent rage. "I am going to destroy you, Zuri." I smiled, reaching into the pocket of my cardigan. I pulled out my smartphone and pressed a single bright red button on the customized security application. Instantly, heavy steel security shutters slammed down over every window in the living room. The thick, reinforced titanium doors slid seamlessly out of the doorframes, locking with a loud, definitive click. The entire room transformed into an impenetrable steel vault in a matter of seconds. Marcus spun around, his rage immediately shifting into pure terror as he realized he was trapped inside the living space. He threw himself against the heavy titanium barriers, pounding his fists helplessly against the unyielding metal. "What did you do?" Marcus screamed violently, rattling the useless door handle. "Open these doors right now, Zuri." "I upgraded the smart home security system yesterday afternoon," I replied calmly, walking toward the reinforced emergency exit located at the rear of the kitchen. "The police have been monitoring this property since the indictments dropped. They received the silent alarm the exact second you shattered my patio glass." I smoothly pushed open the back door, stepping out into the cool, refreshing evening air. The deafening wail of police sirens flooded the neighborhood, red and blue lights illuminating the dark street. I walked calmly down the pathway, leaving Marcus screaming helplessly inside his customized steel cage. The flashing police lights faded into the distance as I drove away from my house that night. I left Marcus screaming helplessly inside his customized steel cage to finally face the severe consequences of his extreme arrogance. 8 months later, the sterile walls of the federal courthouse completely replaced the comforting sanctuary of my suburban home. The air inside courtroom 4 was incredibly thick with tension and the suffocating scent of cheap institutional floor cleaner. Marcus and Preston sat side by side at the heavy wooden defense table, looking utterly miserable. They were officially co-defendants in a massive multi-million-dollar federal fraud and embezzlement case that had gripped the local media. The matching bright orange jumpsuits they wore severely clashed with their usual highly curated country club aesthetics. Their families, including my own parents and a devastated Jada, sat in the gallery behind them, whispering nervously among themselves. I sat perfectly upright in the front row, wearing a tailored navy blue suit, completely unaffected by their hostile glares. The lead defense attorney, A notoriously aggressive man named Harrison Sterling paced back and forth in front of the jury box. He arrogantly adjusted his silk tie and pointed a sharp, accusing finger directly at me. He was desperate to absolutely dismantle my professional credibility and desperately paint me as the true villain of this entire story. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Sterling began, his deep voice dripping with intense, calculated condescension. The prosecution wants you to believe that my client's two brilliant, successful men of finance and technology orchestrated a massive fraud syndicate. But I implore you to look closely at their primary source of supposedly damning information. Look closely at the angry woman sitting right there in the front row. Zuri is certainly not some elite corporate mastermind who runs a massive equity firm. She is merely a bitter, vindictive ex-wife who is orchestrating a desperate smear campaign, simply because her wealthy husband finally decided to leave her for a younger, far more supportive woman. Sterling aggressively grabbed a thin manila file from his wooden table and waved it in the air like a victorious flag. The prosecution actually claims this incredibly ordinary woman is the anonymous majority shareholder of Obsidian Holdings. That proposition is absolutely laughable, and we will easily prove it. Let us carefully examine her actual professional resume for just a brief moment. Zuri holds a very basic, entirely unimpressive degree from a local community college. She spent the last 5 years quietly ironing shirts, changing dirty diapers, and playing the role of a quiet, obedient housewife. She possesses absolutely no elite financial pedigree whatsoever. She has never worked a single day on Wall Street. She has never attended a prestigious Ivy League institution. How could a simple, uneducated housewife possibly untangle complex international offshore accounts and trace sophisticated digital funds? She absolutely could not do it. This entire criminal case is a fabricated fantasy designed maliciously to punish her husband for his tragic marital infidelity. Marcus smirked widely from the defense table, leaning back in his creaky chair, as if Sterling had just miraculously won him his total freedom. Preston nodded vigorously in agreement, his usual white privilege flaring up brightly, even while sitting miserably in a federal detention jumpsuit. They genuinely believed that aggressively attacking my educational background would somehow completely erase the massive mountain of digital evidence I had handed directly to the federal authorities. They were completely and utterly wrong. The presiding judge, an older woman with a strict, no-nonsense demeanor, banged her heavy wooden gavel loudly to immediately silence the angry murmurs erupting in the crowded gallery. Mr. Sterling, you will strictly refrain from making baseless theatrical personal attacks in my federal courtroom, the judge warned him sternly. We will now temporarily move to the civil damages portion firmly attached to this ongoing criminal proceeding. The plaintiff may now call their legal representation forward to approach the central podium. Marcus leaned over to whisper to his attorney, looking incredibly confused. He fully expected a massive team of corporate lawyers to dramatically walk through the heavy wooden courtroom doors. Instead, I calmly stood up from the front row. I picked up my briefcase, pushed open the wooden gate, and walked confidently past the prosecution table. I did not sit weakly in the crowded gallery. I did not rely on a hired attorney to passionately speak for me. I walked directly to the plaintiff's podium and carefully arranged my personal documents. Your Honor, I stated clearly, my voice projecting powerfully across the entirely silent courtroom. I am proudly representing myself pro se for the entirety of this civil damages proceeding. Sterling let out a loud, highly mocking laugh that echoed unpleasantly. You are representing yourself today. A desperate housewife is playing lawyer in federal court. This is a complete and absolute mockery of the judicial system. She does not even know how to properly address the honorable court. I completely ignored his highly childish, unprofessional outburst. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a stack of pristine, meticulously organized financial ledgers. I slammed the binders onto the podium with a resounding thud that echoed sharply off the high ceiling. I do not need an Ivy League law degree to read a basic balance sheet, Mr. Sterling, I replied, staring directly into his nervous eyes. And I certainly do not need a flashy resume to prove exactly how your clients routed $12 million of stolen church funds and venture capital through a dummy corporation in the Cayman Islands. I have the exact internet protocols, the properly time-stamped wire transfers, and the forged digital signatures right here. Sterling's arrogant smile instantly vanished. Marcus gripped the edge of his table, the color completely draining from his face as he stared at the flawless paper trail of his crimes. Preston swallowed hard, his posture slumping in defeat. I opened the first binder, ready to systematically destroy the remaining fragments of their miserable lives. I called Preston to the witness stand. He stood up from the defense table, tugging at the collar of his jumpsuit, attempting to project the confidence of a tech founder. He walked over to the witness box. He sat down, leaning back slightly, crossing his arms in a display of defiance. I did not waste pleasantries. I stepped away from the podium, holding a stack of bank statements, and walked toward him. Preston, let us examine the routing numbers on page 42 of the financial ledger, I stated, handing him the document. Can you confirm that on October 12th, $3 million was transferred from Obsidian Holdings into an offshore account registered to your startup? Preston scoffed, looking with a smirk. I am a visionary Zuri. I handle big-picture concepts, not the day-to-day accounting details. My chief financial officer managed those transactions. I had no direct knowledge of where the capital was routed. That is fascinating, I replied, pacing in front of the jury. Because I hold a sworn affidavit from your chief financial officer who accepted an immunity deal yesterday morning. He testified that you personally ordered the fraudulent transfer using his login credentials. Furthermore, I have the IP address logs placing the digital transaction at your personal laptop inside your home. The smug smile melted off Preston's face. He looked frantically toward his attorney, but Sterling merely stared down at his legal pad, unwilling to intervene against digital evidence. Preston began to sweat. The heavy silence in the courtroom magnified his panic. His posture crumbled, his shoulders slumping forward as the illusion of his white privilege shattered into a million pieces. It was Marcus! Preston shouted, his voice cracking as he pointed a shaking finger at his partner. Marcus approached me with the scheme. He told me the church funds were untraceable. He set up the shell companies in the Cayman Islands. He promised me the capital infusion would keep my startup afloat. I was just following his financial advice. He manipulated the situation to steal from your firm. Marcus jumped up from the defense table, his face twisted in fury. You lying coward! He screamed, straining against the heavy hands of the courtroom bailiffs who forced him back into his chair. So you admit to knowingly receiving stolen capital. I summarized clearly for the court reporter, allowing his cowardly confession to echo through the large room. But let us move past your financial desperation, Preston. Let us explore the actual character behind this massive fraud. Let us discuss how you callously used your marriage to my sister Jada to secure initial funding from diverse investment boards. I returned to the podium and retrieved a thin plastic evidence sleeve. I handed it to the bailiff, who passed it to Preston. I direct your attention to Plaintiff Exhibit F, I said coldly. This is a transcript of text messages you sent to your college fraternity brothers exactly 2 weeks before your lavish wedding. Read the highlighted portion aloud for the court. Preston stared down at the paper, his hands trembling violently. I cannot read this out loud, he whispered, looking pleadingly at the judge. This is a private conversation. It has absolutely no bearing on the financial charges. The judge frowned, looking down from her high bench. The plaintiff is establishing your ongoing pattern of systemic deception and fraudulent intent. Read the highlighted text. Mr. Preston or I will hold you in contempt of court. Preston swallowed hard. The entire gallery leaned forward, completely silent. Jada sat in the second row, clutching her designer purse, her eyes wide with fearful anticipation. It says, Preston mumbled, his voice barely audible. It says the startup needs minority backing to secure the new diversity grants. He stopped, choking on the remaining words. Read the rest of the sentence, Preston, I demanded sharply. I found the perfect gullible prop. Preston read, tears of supreme humiliation pooling in his eyes. Jada is completely obsessed with money and status. I just have to buy her a few cheap designer bags, and her family will treat me like a king. Her loud ghetto parents are incredibly desperate for white validation. Once the startup gets the diversity capital, I will dump her and take the profits. A sharp, agonizing wail erupted from the gallery. Jada buried her face in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably, as the perfect privileged marriage she had relentlessly rubbed in my face completely disintegrated in front of the entire community. My mother Loretta sat frozen beside her, thoroughly humiliated by the horrific racial slurs and the brutal reality of Preston's parasitic deception. You used my sister as a convenient disposable shield to hide your massive financial failures, I stated, staring down at his broken, weeping form. You are not a tech visionary, Preston. You are a common, pathetic thief who relied on unearned privilege to steal from hardworking people. I turned my back on him and addressed the judge, concluding my flawless presentation of undeniable proof. The jury did not even need to deliberate for long. Following the comprehensive civil and criminal arguments, the judge looked down at the defendants with absolute disgust. She raised her heavy wooden gavel high into the air. Based on the overwhelming, irrefutable evidence presented to this court, the judge announced, her voice booming with finality, I find both defendants guilty on all federal counts of fraud and embezzlement and fully liable for all requested civil damages. The gavel struck the sounding block with a loud, definitive crack. The sound signaled the absolute end of their privileged lives. Marcus violently ripped his arms away from the approaching bailiffs. He stood up, his face red with frantic, desperate rage. You can take the company funds, Zuri, Marcus yelled across the chaotic courtroom, his voice filled with manic delusion. But we are still legally married. Everything you own is marital property. I still have full legal rights to exactly half of your entire multi-million-dollar portfolio. His screams echoed through the corridors as the doors swung shut. 3 weeks later, we found ourselves in an entirely different legal arena. The bright lighting of the family court felt blinding compared to the federal room. This was our final divorce settlement hearing. Marcus sat at the petitioner table, no longer wearing tailored suits, but instead dressed in standard-issue jail clothing. He was awaiting transfer to a federal penitentiary destitute after the government seized his assets. Despite his criminal downfall, his ego remained intact. He sat with shoulders squared, an arrogant smirk plastered across his face. He whispered aggressively to his public defender, pointing a dirty finger in my direction. He firmly believed this hearing was his ultimate salvation. He believed he was about to secure a financial payout that would sustain his commissary accounts for 20 long years. The family court judge, a stern man with silver hair and a deeply lined forehead, peered over his reading glasses. He formally called the docket and asked Marcus to state his primary financial demands for the official record. Marcus eagerly stood up. He smoothed the front of his wrinkled orange uniform as if he were preparing to deliver a keynote address to a board of wealthy investors. He cleared his throat loudly, projecting his voice so every single person in the small gallery could hear his ridiculous entitlement. Your Honor, I am petitioning this court for permanent alimony and an immediate equal division of all marital assets. Marcus declared, his chest puffed out with pride. As federal prosecutors proved last month, my ex-wife is a multimillionaire. She possesses vast wealth accumulated during our 5-year marriage. Due to my legal complications, I have been left destitute. I have zero income, zero savings, and zero capital. Therefore, according to the standard parameters of our original prenuptial agreement, I am entitled to 50% of her corporate portfolio. She hid her wealth from me, but the law states any asset gained during marriage must be divided equally. She owes me millions in spousal support to maintain the standard of living I grew accustomed to during our relationship. Marcus let out a loud laugh, shaking his head as he looked directly at me. He genuinely thought he had executed a brilliant legal maneuver. He believed his previous financial crimes were completely irrelevant to the division of family assets. He arrogantly assumed the generic prenuptial agreement we hastily signed 5 years ago, which mandated a 50-50 split of all joint acquisitions, was his impenetrable shield. He had not bothered to hire a specialized family lawyer because he always assumed he would be the primary breadwinner. He always assumed he would be the one protecting his vast fortune from my modest lifestyle. Now he was gleefully attempting to use that exact same outdated document to completely drain my private equity firm. The judge turned his attention to me, his expression reflecting a deep weariness regarding Marcus and his audacity. He asked if I had a formal response to the petitioner and his aggressive financial demands. I stood up from the respondent table. I wore a tailored crimson suit projecting undeniable authority. I did not bring a legal team today. I simply brought a black leather briefcase. I placed the briefcase onto the polished wooden table and clicked the latches open. The sharp sound echoed in the silent courtroom. Your Honor, the petitioner is absolutely correct regarding the existence of our original prenuptial agreement. I stated clearly, my voice ringing with unshakable confidence. We did indeed sign a generic contract exactly 5 years ago, and under those extremely outdated parameters, he would theoretically be entitled to half of my corporate earnings. However, the petitioner seems to have experienced a severe lapse in his memory regarding his recent marital activities. Marcus frowned, his arrogant smirk faltering slightly as he leaned forward. He crossed his arms over his chest, glaring at me with deep suspicion. I pulled a thick, professionally bound document from my briefcase and handed a copy to the courtroom bailiff, instructing him to pass it directly to the judge. I handed a second copy to Marcus and his public defender. Marcus snatched the document, his eyes scanning the bold, legally binding text. Exactly 2 months ago, my husband decided to take a highly romantic vacation to the Maldives. I explained, turning to face the judge. He claimed it was an urgent business trip to secure a massive client acquisition. In reality, it was a lavish honeymoon funded by our joint savings account, dedicated to entertaining his junior assistant. During his preparations for this getaway, Marcus was extremely annoyed by the administrative burdens of his actual job. He absolutely hated dealing with what he constantly referred to as boring paperwork. Marcus stopped reading. His hands began to tremble violently as the reality of the document finally registered in his panicking brain. Because he was so eager to leave the country with his mistress, he carelessly asked me to manage his daily financial responsibilities. I continued, my smile widening into something fiercely triumphant. To facilitate this, Marcus willingly signed a comprehensive power of attorney, granting me absolute authority to draft, sign, and execute any legal or financial documents on his behalf. I have submitted the fully notarized uncontested power of attorney as Exhibit A. The judge flipped to the corresponding page, nodding in silent confirmation. Marcus let out a sharp gasp, his face turning an alarming shade of gray. While the petitioner was busy drinking expensive champagne and betraying our marriage vows on a tropical beach, I utilized that exact power of attorney to completely restructure our financial union. I announced, delivering the final blow. I legally drafted and executed a binding post-nuptial agreement. The updated terms explicitly stipulate that in the event of documented infidelity, severe financial fraud, or criminal indictment, Marcus forfeits his right to all marital assets, all corporate holdings, and all future spousal support. The petitioner gets absolutely zero. The heavy oak doors of the family courtroom swung shut behind me, sealing Marcus inside a reality where his bank accounts perfectly matched his morality. He truly had absolutely zero. Returning to the suburban house that afternoon felt entirely different. For 5 years, this sprawling 4-bedroom property had been the physical manifestation of my prescribed role. It was the house where I was supposed to be the quiet, unseen risk analyst. It was the kitchen where I had cooked organic meals for a man who despised me, and the living room where my parents had sat on my furniture and demanded my absolute submission. Walking through the empty, echoing halls, I realized that this house was no longer a sanctuary. It was a museum dedicated to a woman who no longer existed. I walked into the master bedroom and looked at the immaculate king-sized bed. I felt no nostalgia, no lingering heartbreak. I pulled out my phone and dialed the number of the most aggressive luxury real estate agent in the state. I instructed him to list the property immediately. I did not want to pack up the expensive furniture, the fine china, or the plush rugs Marcus had selected to project an image of suburban perfection. I instructed the agent to sell the house fully furnished, exactly as it stood. I wanted absolutely nothing that held the energetic residue of my fake marriage. The only things I packed were my daughter's clothes, her favorite toys, and my encrypted server array. Within 48 hours, an all-cash buyer purchased the suburban property above asking price. With the final tie to my past legally severed, I authorized a massive wire transfer from Obsidian Holdings to a private developer in the city's financial district. I did not just buy an apartment. I purchased the entire top floor of the most exclusive, heavily secured residential skyscraper in the state. Moving into the penthouse was not just a change of address. It was a psychological coronation. The private elevator required a biometric retinal scan, ensuring that no uninvited toxic family members could ever ambush me in my living space again. The sheer magnitude of the penthouse was breathtaking. It featured imported Italian marble floors soaring 20-foot ceilings and a massive wraparound terrace that offered a 360-degree view of the city skyline. I hired a staff of highly vetted professionals, a private chef, a meticulous housekeeper, and a dedicated, loving nanny to assist me with my daughter while I managed my multi-million-dollar portfolio. For the first time in my 33 years of life, I was breathing air that wasn't contaminated by someone else's expectations. I was no longer minimizing my intellect to protect a fragile man's ego, nor was I shrinking myself to fit into my parents' toxic narrative of familial sacrifice. I had fundamentally rewritten the financial and social hierarchy of my entire bloodline. 2 weeks later, I stood quietly by the floor-to-ceiling glass windows of my newly acquired luxury penthouse in the heart of the financial district. The panoramic view of the bustling city below was a breathtaking daily reminder of the colossal empire I successfully built entirely on my own terms. I took a slow sip of my freshly brewed black coffee, enjoying the profound, uninterrupted silence of my personal sanctuary. That peaceful tranquility shattered abruptly when the private elevator chimed directly into my foyer. The polished steel doors slid open to reveal my younger sister, Jada. She looked absolutely nothing like the arrogant, designer-clad socialite who relentlessly mocked my conservative corporate suits just a few months ago. Jada wore oversized sunglasses to hide her puffy, red-rimmed eyes. Her unwashed hair was haphazardly tied into a messy knot, and she dragged two massive, visibly scuffed suitcases across my pristine marble floor. Preston was currently sitting in a federal detention center, awaiting his transfer, leaving her entirely broke and socially exiled. Her affluent white in-laws completely disowned her. The exact second Preston's massive fraud became public knowledge. Now she was desperately crawling back to the only person she ever viewed as a reliable ATM. Zuri, thank goodness your building security finally let me upstairs. Jada gasped, dropping her heavy bags with a loud, obnoxious thud. I told the concierge downstairs that I was your little sister, and it was an absolute family emergency. I am moving in with you today. The bank officially foreclosed on our suburban estate this morning. They literally forced me out onto the street. You have plenty of room in this massive penthouse, so I will take the master guest suite down the hall. I did not offer her a warm embrace. I did not step forward to help with her heavy luggage. I simply placed my coffee mug on the glass table and stared at her with absolute, unwavering indifference. You are not moving into my home, Jada, I stated firmly, my voice echoing coldly off the high ceilings. You need to turn around, drag your bags back into that elevator, and leave my property immediately. Jada ripped off her sunglasses, her face twisting into a mask of pure, indignant shock. She stomped her foot on the marble floor like a petulant toddler denied a toy. Are you seriously doing this to me right now? I am your family, Zuri. I am going through the most horrific, traumatic divorce imaginable. Preston completely ruined my life. He lied to me, he humiliated me in federal court, and he left me with absolutely nothing. You have millions of dollars sitting in the bank. You own a massive private equity firm. It is your fundamental duty as my older sister to protect me and provide for me. We are blood. Your definition of blood only applies when your bank account is empty, I replied smoothly, crossing my arms over my chest. When Preston was openly disrespecting my career and throwing racial slurs at our entire family, you smiled and drank his expensive champagne. You enthusiastically participated in his arrogant delusions because you thought his fake wealth made you superior to me. You never acted like a sister when you were sitting at the top of the social hierarchy. Jada's aggressive demeanor instantly melted into a desperate, highly calculated performance of sisterly affection. She forced large tears into her eyes, stepping forward with her hands clasped together in a pleading gesture. "We are sisters forever, Zuri," Jada cried, her voice shaking with manufactured emotion. "Do you remember when we were little girls, we used to stay up late sharing secrets in our bedroom? We promised we would always take care of each other no matter what happened. I know I made some terrible mistakes with Preston, but I am still that same little girl who looks up to her brilliant older sister. You cannot just abandon me to the streets. I have absolutely nowhere else to go. I need you to step up and be the bigger person." I looked at her fake tears and felt absolutely nothing but supreme clarity. I walked over to the hall closet and pulled out a small, incredibly battered vinyl suitcase. I rolled it deliberately across the floor and stopped it right at her feet. "I remember our childhood very clearly, Jada," I said, my tone razor-sharp and devoid of any lingering pity. "I remember being 20 years old, working two exhausting jobs to quietly pay your expensive university tuition because our parents demanded I sacrifice my graduate school dreams for your comfort. I remember how you repaid that massive financial sacrifice. You forced me to wear your discarded, torn, incredibly cheap clothes to family gatherings so you could exclusively parade around in the expensive designer brands my hard-earned paychecks bought you. You deliberately made me look inferior so you could shine brighter." Jada stared down at the battered vinyl suitcase, her jaw trembling as genuine panic finally replaced her theatrical performance. "Open it," I commanded forcefully. She slowly unzipped the dark bag. Inside was a collection of faded, torn, completely worn-out shirts and cheap, scuffed shoes. It was the exact same wardrobe of humiliation she once forced upon me. "You want to live off my resources?" I asked, staring directly into her terrified eyes. "You can take that suitcase and start over exactly where you forced me to start. You can go find a minimum wage job and learn how to actually survive without leeching off my success. Your free ride is permanently over." "You cannot do this to me," Jada whispered in horror. "I am your sister." "The black tax is officially cancelled," I said firmly, closing the heavy penthouse doors directly in her weeping face. The click of my door locking behind Jada was absolute liberation. I picked up my coffee. My toxic family ties were fully severed. However, the audacity of entitled men knows no bounds. Months later, a process server handed me a thick envelope. Marcus, despite serving a 10-year sentence for massive fraud, had officially filed a petition for partial custody of our daughter. He tried to use the court system to torment me. He assigned his mother, Francine, as his legal proxy. We returned to the courthouse on a rainy Tuesday. Francine sat at the petitioner table wearing a floral dress and a wide-brimmed church hat. She clutched a large Bible to her chest, attempting to project an image of wholesome grandmotherly devotion. Marcus appeared on a large screen mounted on the wall, attending the hearing via a video link from the federal penitentiary. He leaned close to the camera, his face twisted in a bitter scowl. He hated that I was thriving, raising our daughter in luxury while he ate processed cafeteria food. The judge asked Francine to state her case. Francine eagerly stood up. "Your Honor, my son made some business errors, but he is a loving father who deserves access to his child," she declared. "I am petitioning for primary physical custody on his behalf. Zuri is completely unfit to raise this innocent child. She is a ruthless corporate executive who cares more about acquiring real estate than her baby. Her sudden massive wealth has made her incredibly neglectful. She hands my granddaughter off to expensive nannies while she destroys people in corporate boardrooms. A child needs a traditional home environment, not a sterile penthouse managed by a bitter woman." I sat quietly absorbing her deeply hypocritical insults. "Your Honor, my wealth does not make me neglectful," I stated, standing to address the court. "It provides absolute security, a concept Francine has never truly understood." Francine allowed Marcus to grow into a narcissistic predator because she excused his behavior under the guise of traditional values. "Let us discuss your version of traditional values, Francine." I continued, looking into her angry eyes. "You stand here criticizing my mothering skills, claiming I am too busy to nurture my daughter. Yet you conveniently ignore the fact that you covered for your son while he drained our accounts. When Marcus manipulated our finances to fund illicit affairs, you happily accepted the designer handbags he bought you with my stolen wages. You raised a man who views women as disposable appliances, and now you want to inject that exact toxic ideology into my daughter's life. Francine gasped, pressing her hand against her chest. That is a vicious lie, she shouted toward the high bench. My son is a good man. He would have been a dedicated father if she had not ruthlessly set him up to take the fall for her corporate schemes. He was incredibly excited for the birth of his child. Marcus nodded vigorously on the video screen, attempting to look like a victimized parent. I did not raise my voice. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a small encrypted silver flash drive. I handed it to the bailiff, requesting that he play the video file on the main projector. Your Honor, the petitioner claims he was a dedicated father who was brutally robbed of his parental rights, I said clearly. I submit into evidence the security camera footage from the maternity ward at Mercy General Hospital, recorded exactly on the day my daughter was born. The large screen in the courtroom flickered to life. The high-definition footage clearly showed the sterile hospital hallway. The timestamp in the corner proved it was exactly 15 days after I had actually delivered my baby completely alone. The video showed Marcus strutting arrogantly up to the main nurse's station. He was deeply tanned from his Maldives vacation, casually swinging a luxury leather duffel bag. Clinging tightly to his arm, wearing a sheer sundress, was his 24-year-old mistress Lexi. As the court can clearly observe, I narrated smoothly, watching the absolute horror wash over Francine's face. The petitioner did not rush to the hospital in a panic. He casually strolled in 2 weeks late, bringing his junior assistant along for the visit. When the head nurse informed him that I had already given birth, paid the medical bill in cash, and safely taken our daughter home 15 days prior, he did not ask if the baby was healthy. He did not ask if I was safe or alive. On the screen, Marcus threw a violent tantrum, slamming his hands on the desk and screaming at the hospital staff before kicking a trash can and storming out of the ward. He abandoned his child on day 1 to drink expensive champagne on an island with an intern. I stated, my voice echoing with finality. He demonstrated intentional parental neglect and absolute moral bankruptcy long before he ever wore that orange jumpsuit. The judge stared at the screen with profound, visible disgust. She sharply turned her gaze to the video feed of Marcus, who was now desperately hiding his face in his hands. This court has absolutely zero tolerance for this exceptional level of abhorrent manipulation, the judge declared, her voice ringing with furious authority. Mr. Marcus, your legal petition is not only entirely frivolous, it is deeply offensive to the judicial system. You abandoned your newborn child to pursue an illicit affair, and you now arrogantly attempt to use this court to harass the mother who actually stepped up to provide care. The judge raised her heavy wooden gavel high into the air. The petition for custody is immediately denied with extreme prejudice. Furthermore, based on the documented neglect and your current long-term federal incarceration, I am permanently and entirely revoking your parental rights. You will never have legal access to this child. The gavel struck the sounding block with a loud crack, sealing his total isolation. 6 months later, the stark reality of federal prison had completely erased Marcus's arrogant country club persona. The harsh clanging of metal doors and the constant shouting of hardened inmates became his new daily soundtrack. He sat alone in a loud, overcrowded cafeteria, pushing a gray scoop of processed meat around a plastic tray. He traded his gourmet steak dinners for flavorless mush. The tailored Italian suits he once flaunted were replaced by a fading, scratchy khaki uniform that hung loosely on his shrinking frame. He no longer had Lexi clinging to his arm. She had immediately abandoned him the day his bank accounts were frozen, running off with a junior associate from their former firm. Marcus spent his days scrubbing prison toilets for mere cents an hour. Every time he mopped the dirty concrete floors, he painfully remembered the pristine hardwood of our suburban home. He realized too late that my quiet domestic submission was a conscious choice, not a weakness. I was the solid foundation that afforded him the luxury of his delusions. Now he had absolutely nothing but decades of concrete walls and the agonizing knowledge that his own greed had destroyed the only woman who ever truly built him up. His absolute ruin was complete. Preston fared no better on the outside. After serving a reduced sentence for turning state's evidence against Marcus, he emerged into a world that utterly rejected him. His wealthy white family, horrified by the public release of his highly offensive racist text messages, completely cut him off. They legally disinherited him to protect their elite corporate reputation. Preston currently rented a damp, windowless basement room in a decaying part of the city. His former investors actively sued him for his deceptive practices, draining the very last remnants of his personal savings. He tried desperately to pitch new technology startups to local investors, but his name was permanently blacklisted across the entire financial sector. The sheer arrogance that once fueled his microaggressions had evaporated. He spent his evenings sitting on a stained mattress, staring blankly at the peeling wallpaper. He finally understood that his supposed racial superiority was a pathetic illusion. He possessed no useful skills to rebuild his shattered life. He had blindly relied on my financial capital and my sister's desperate need for validation to mask his own profound mediocrity. Without my silent investments propping him up, he was just another failed entrepreneur with zero prospects and zero allies. He was completely alone. My sister Jada experienced the most dramatic fall from grace. The former socialite who once refused to wear anything unless it bore a luxury designer label now wore a stiff polyester uniform that smelled permanently of stale grease and cheap frying oil. Her feet ached constantly from standing on the hard concrete floors for 10 hours a day, a sharp contrast to her previous life of leisurely spa appointments. She worked the late-night drive-through window at a fast food franchise situated off a busy, noisy interstate. One rainy Tuesday evening, a luxury SUV pulled up to her window. Jada forced a tired customer service smile and extended her hand to collect the payment. She froze in absolute horror. The driver was one of her former bridesmaids, a woman who used to attend her lavish dinner parties. The woman grabbed her meal, gave Jada a look of profound pity, and sped away without saying a single word. Jada retreated to the greasy break room and cried bitter, exhausted tears. She was truly miserable. She looked down at her cracked, unmanicured fingernails. The painful truth washed over her like freezing water. She realized she never actually earned her luxurious lifestyle. She had spent her entire adult life violently biting the only hand that continuously fed her. The black tax she had so proudly forced me to pay was the only thing preventing her from extreme poverty. I was never her inferior. I was her entire safety net. Now she was completely untethered, forced to finally carry her own weight in a world that did not care about her manufactured elite status. Across town, my parents, Deacon Silas and Mother Loretta, sat in grim silence inside a tiny, cramped one-bedroom apartment. The expansive, beautifully decorated home they once owned was sold to cover the massive debts Preston had fraudulently incurred in their names. Their highly coveted social status within the church community had instantly vanished the moment I exposed their financial corruption. Silas was forced to resign from his deacon board in absolute disgrace. Loretta could no longer host her elegant Sunday brunches or boast about her wealthy daughters. Their former church friends crossed the street to avoid speaking to them, whispering harshly about their wicked greed. Their fall from grace was spectacular. They sat on a cheap, sagging sofa, listening to the loud sirens wailing on the dangerous street below their barred window. They had prioritized public perception and toxic patriarchal traditions over the mental and emotional well-being of their eldest child. They demanded I endure extreme disrespect just to maintain a fragile fake image of family perfection. In the quiet, suffocating darkness of their new impoverished reality, they finally faced the devastating consequences of their profound hypocrisy. The quiet daughter they had bullied, exploited, and relentlessly scapegoated was the only pillar holding their entire lives together. When they pushed me away, their entire universe collapsed. Loretta wiped a single tear from her wrinkled cheek. She pulled her outdated cell phone from her pocket, her hands trembling with desperate, overwhelming regret. She dialed my number, hoping to use a familiar manipulative guilt trip to secure just a fraction of my immense wealth. She pressed the phone to her ear, closing her eyes and praying for a miraculous rescue. A cold, automated voice echoed through the tiny apartment. "We are sorry. The number you have reached has been permanently disconnected."